In a show of unity, the majority of the Muslim world has condemned not only the anti-Islamic statements by France's president, but also the brutal killings of French citizens in recent terror attacks. Over the past month, trust between Emmanuel Macron's government and France's Muslim community has been strained. Divisive statements and actions by Macron that many Muslims have spoken out against has created a tense atmosphere the country hasn't seen in years. Haider Abbasi explains.
From Libya to Bangladesh, a wave of anger. At almost every rally, protesters burn Emmanuel Macron's portrait. They're united in their outrage at the French president. They believe he's insulted Islam and the founder of the religion, the Prophet Muhammad. So what exactly did Macron say? At the start of October, he gave a speech in Paris where he said this.
L'islam est une religion qui vit une crise aujourd'hui, partout dans le monde. Nous ne le voyons pas que dans notre pays.
In the same speech, Macron promised to tackle what he called Islamist separatism in France and said that anyone who wants to become French must accept people's freedom to commit blasphemy. His government is planning to introduce a bill strengthening a law that separates religion and the state. The president says the change is aimed at what he calls growing radicalism in France. But Muslims there and elsewhere have accused Macron of stigmatizing their community and using divisive language. 2 weeks later, tensions in France escalated. A teacher was beheaded outside his school after he showed his students caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. His suspected attacker was shot dead by police. Muslims revere the Prophet, and any visual depiction of him is forbidden. The French president has defended the teacher and the cartoons, which first appeared in the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. These caricatures portray the Prophet as a terrorist. As a tribute to the slain teacher, the cartoons are projected onto government buildings in 2 French cities. This provoked a backlash in Muslim countries, and some Muslims began calling for a boycott of all things French. It even caught the attention of heads of states.
İslam ve Müslüman düşmanlığı kimi Avrupa ülkelerinde bizzat devlet başkanı seviyesinde teşvik edilen, desteklenen bir politik haline gelmiştir. Irkçı terörizm. Şimdi buradan sesleniyorum. İşte siz gerçek manada faşistsiniz. Siz gerçek manada Nazi'nin adeta zincir halkalarısınız.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself has urged his citizens to boycott French goods. But Macron is refusing to concede. On Sunday, he tweeted, "We will not give in, ever. We do not accept hate speech and defend reasonable debate. We will always be on the side of human dignity and universal values." Some analysts say Macron is pandering to the right as he looks towards the presidential election in 2022. But he is surely alienating French Muslims and damaging relations with Muslim states. Haider Abbasi, Straight Talk.
And joining me now from Istanbul is Farid Hafez. He is a lecturer and researcher at the University of Salzburg, and also from Istanbul, Enes Bayrakli, who is the Director of European Studies at the SETA Foundation. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. The rift between Muslim nations and France is growing after French President Emmanuel Macron said Islam is a religion in crisis all around the world. And then he pressed ahead defending the publication of cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. So Farid, what does he have in his mind? Is he deliberately trying to be provocative?
Well, I think it's a pushback, and it's also kind of a distraction strategy, because obviously the problems that Macron is currently facing and the plans he is implementing is basically a crackdown on Muslim civil society. We have seen this, more than 50 Muslim associations, including anti-racist associations, are on the track should be dissolved according to the Ministry of Interior. This is just 2 months before the so-called anti-separatism bill is planned to be debated in the national parliament. So I think the whole debate about the cartoons now is basically a distraction from the real problems going on in terms of structural racism.
France seems to be wrestling with ensuring freedom of speech, even if it comes at the expense of defaming a religion, Enes. How can countries like France achieve to balance that?
I think there is, there are a lot of double standards here. That French the state or the Macron demands that the Muslims accept that their prophet is insulted. But when it comes to other caricatures or harassment to other groups, it is not tolerated. So it is expected from Muslims to accept this kind of behavior, which is a double standard. On the other hand, as you mentioned, that the French state now wants to somehow interfere in the religious affairs of Muslim theological discussions, and wants to somehow reform Islam. But this is totally against the principle of secularism or laicite, because as far as we understand, or the experts' opinion, right? The laicite or secularism means that the state doesn't interfere with the religion, and the religion doesn't interfere with the state affairs. Yeah. However, what we see is a direct intervention from the French state to shape or reshape of the religion of Islam.
And after his comments, Farid, many Muslim countries denounced France and decided to boycott French products. What do you make of the international backlash, and have those reactions served their purpose?
Well, I'm not very optimistic, and I also think that I doubt that this is the way to go, because first of all, what I see here, there is a responsibility that lies first and foremost on behalf of other European nation states. So I think this whole boycott movement has rather strengthened the European ties within Europe in order to support the French position. And it also helped Macron to really mobilize on behalf of freedom of speech. But if we go back, the structural problem of racism that Muslims are facing, I doubt that this can be helped with by trying to rally a protest against the French government.
Yeah, those unfortunate comments, unfortunately, led to the Nice attack, in which 3 civilians were brutally killed. Despite the current feud between Turkey and France, the Turkish Foreign Ministry released a statement condemning the Nice attack. And at the end of the statement, Turkey says, as a country which fights against different sorts of terror and loses its citizens as a result of terrorism, we emphasize our solidarity with the French people, the residents of Nice in particular, against terrorism and violence. So, Enes, is it likely after those brutal attacks Macron could adopt a more conciliatory tone? And as for the France-Turkey relations, what would you say? Have they reached their rock bottom?
I think, let's look at what happened in the last month in France. Like in the last month, there were 4 terror attacks, 2 somehow ISIS related, right? And 2 also far-right related terror attacks. But what we see in the French media is all about the ISIL attacks covered there. And then it is being instrumentalized by the Macron government to further alienate and marginalize Muslim society and criminalize the Muslim civil society, NGOs and institutions. Of course, this is a very worrying development, because if the French government and the Macron is sincere in its goal to fight against radicalization, then it has to do it against all kinds of radicalization. Yes. And we also see that there is a strong radicalization amongst the far right, and that leads to also terror attacks. So by only focusing on Muslims, this is associating the only Muslims and Islam with the terrorism. This is what is unacceptable, and I think this is the main problem here.
Yeah, those caricatures were first published in 2006 by a Danish newspaper, Jyllands-Posten, sparking a wave of protests again around the world. But then late President Jacques Chirac had condemned decisions to reprint cartoons, including the Prophet Muhammad, as an overt provocation. So Farid, how France has come to this point?
Well, I mean, I think it is a manifestation of the situation, basically, that Muslims in France are going through. Because I mean, cartoons are there, and I fully defend also the right to draw whatever people want to draw, but they're basically there to criticize those in power. I think what the problem that we are facing with these kinds of cartoons in this context, also with Charlie Hebdo, is that it is the most marginalized people that are criticized, while there is a majority and people who are in a dominant position who draw and can mobilize the freedom of speech theme in order to strengthen their power and to further alienate those already being marginalized. So I don't see that the cartoon here really serves the purpose of really criticizing those in power, but it rather further reaffirms the power position of those who further marginalize the marginalized, racialized other, the Muslim people.
But what kind of mechanisms then, Enes, should be employed to fight anti-Islam sentiments and anti-Islam rhetoric, given that there are about 44 million Muslims living across Europe?
Look, I mean, the Muslims, as Farid said, quite a weak minority in terms of economical power, political power, cultural power. I mean, Muslims are not even enough represented in the French Parliament. There are only 8 Muslim MPs in the French Parliament, although the 8%, almost until the 10% of the population is Muslim. So that shows us that Muslims are quite a weak minority in France, and they don't have any means to fight against this discrimination. And this is a quite big problem for Muslims. And many people, they think that this is only about Islam or the Muslims. No, I think this is a much bigger problem, because that Muslims are used, and Islamophobia is to further normalize the far-right discourse in all around Europe. And this is shifting the whole European politics towards far-right ideas and rhetoric. Yeah. And at the end of the day, everybody is going to lose in Europe, not only Muslims. But I think many people, they do not realize this. And they think this is the only Muslims' problem, but I don't think this is the Muslim problem only.
So Farid, what's the way out of this conundrum?
Well, I think first of all, people have to come to terms with their own history and with their own present. I mean, France is a post-colonial republic, right? I think there are so many things that France has to tackle with in terms of the status quo, but also in terms of the historical legacy. And people in Europe in general, specifically in Western Europe, have to come to terms with the fact that there is a massive problem with anti-Muslim racism. If this is not even recognized as a problem, then we are far away from even coming to discuss about any kind of solutions. I mean, there are so many anti-racist organizations and people who are standing on the right side who know what could be done. But I see that there is, in many European countries, and first and foremost France, that there is no political will to do that.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.